Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Police in Lethbridge were called out to a high school earlier today following a serious threat. The Alberta government has cancelled its controversial K-6 curriculum for social studies. Education Minister Adriana LaGrange explains why. And the feds released their fiscal update today. We chat with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation about what that means for you.
Your nation. Your province. Your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Lethbridge police were called out to Winston Churchill High School earlier today in response to a reported electronic threat. As a precaution, the school division made the decision to close the school and send students and staff home for the day. Lethbridge police haven't released any more information other than to say there's no longer a threat to the community and an investigation is ongoing. We'll have more information for you as it becomes available. Bridge City News was also informed that staff and students at Lethbridge Collegiate Institute were also evacuated and sent home. What we know at this point is that there may have also been a threat, an electronic threat at that high school, and officials felt sending everyone home was the best precautionary measure possible. Police say the threats at the two schools were not connected. We'll have more information for you on that story as details roll in. A Lethbridge man who was found guilty of various charges, including kidnapping, received an 8-year prison term. 40-year-old Corey Ray Williams was sentenced in provincial court Monday for his actions involving kidnapping, assault with a weapon, dangerous driving, uttering threats, and possession of a weapon for a dangerous purpose. Since Williams has already served 752 days behind bars, the judge took off 50 months for his sentence. The court said Williams will also not be allowed to own a weapon for the rest of his life and cannot operate a vehicle for 10 years following his release from jail. Lethbridge anti-maskers stormed Lethbridge City Hall earlier today with a message that they wanted their voices heard concerning the current vaccine and mask mandates here in the province.
I believe in Canada we should have a choice as to whether we want to inject something into our bodies. I think it's a freedom of choice that we're talking about here. Never in history have we come in this fashion, being mandated on a massive scale in employer-employee types of things. And we're being told that unless we get them, we have to lose our jobs.
I have been on leave of absence since November the 1st of this year. Today I had a grievance meeting with my manager. It doesn't look very hopeful that my job will continue. It's based on the fact that I refuse to take the vaccine.
The protesters said they went to City Hall to share their concerns with Lethbridge Mayor Blaine Hagan and the rest of City Council. Jeanette Rocher is here now with a quick peek at our weather forecast. Jeanette, with a cloudy, cool day and more snow maybe on the way?
Yeah, that's right. Some flurry activity was actually expected today, and more will be on the way later on this week, just when we thought it was gone, right? Also appearing to be going into a deep freeze this week. Temperature is going to be dropping drastically. Overnight low this evening, -17. Later this week, we could see overnight temperatures as low as -24 and feeling even worse with a wind chill. Could be time to start plugging our cars in too. I will have more weather details coming up for you later on in the show.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. The Alberta government says it has killed its controversial kindergarten through grade 6 social studies draft curriculum. Officials say they'll be updating plans for a range of subjects that were originally slated to be brought online next fall. Education Minister Adriana LaGrange says subjects including fine arts, French immersion language arts, and social studies are being put on hold until new drafts can be released next spring.
My goal as Education Minister has always been to put the best curriculum possible in front of our students, and this is done by working together. The steps we are taking now will ensure our students are learning from an updated curriculum that prepares them for the future, and we are committed to taking the time to get it right. I look forward to working together to build a future where all students have the knowledge and skills they need to succeed.
Many school boards refused to pilot the current curriculum, which many argued lacked in diversity. The second attempt at Alberta government's K-6 draft curriculum came following fierce opposition from many teachers and students. Board chair with the Lethbridge School Division, Alison Purcell, says while there are some improvements, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done before the new curriculum rolls out.
We are cautious to overly commend at this time for the changes, as it appears that they are somewhat superficial. For example, it was stated that the English Language Arts curriculum further emphasized critical and creative thinking at the grade 4 through 6 level. The shift was substituting with the words used to develop and identified to relate. This is one example of a common trend identified when comparing the draft curriculum with the revisions announced by the minister yesterday. The mathematics curriculum has yet to be changed and continues to have content at grade levels that are not developmentally appropriate. It is our understanding that changes will be forthcoming. Overall, the changes do not move a curriculum into what is necessary for contemporary learners. Content is clearly still taking precedent over process and critical thinking.
Purcell further criticized the updated draft, saying student learning competencies continue to be neglected and overshadowed by what is referred to as essential knowledge. The Blood Tribe Opioid Response Team is celebrating members who have been sober for a long period of time. The goal of the campaign is to spread awareness of those who have beaten their addictions. Video journalist Micah Quinn has the details.
The Christmas holiday Persons with Living Experience campaign is meant to showcase individual stories of sobriety from members of the Blood Tribe. If you scroll through the Blood Tribe Communications Facebook page, you'll notice a huge number of success stories from members of the community that have been able to stay sober for a number of years. The showcased members are selected based on community nominations. The Blood Tribe Opioid Response Coordinator, Elena Meniguns, says we need to take every opportunity to help save a person's life.
I'm very surprised and I'm very excited that the community is forwarding pictures and answering those questions of their nominee, of traditional name, what is their name, and people are coming forward and saying, I've been sober for 2 years, or I've been sober off drugs for 6 months, or I've been sober for 9 years. And so all that is coming from the community. So as long as the community keeps bringing them forward, we will keep posting them.
Meniguns says to not be afraid to ask for help if you are battling addiction.
No one can make you go for treatment. We can plead, we can pray, we can beg, we can do everything, but initially it's that person's own decision. So just knowing, telling them that they're not alone and to reach out and take that huge step is a big step, and that we will be there from when you take that first step.
The success stories will be online on Facebook until the first week of January of next year. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
A new micro-library has been installed on the Piikani Nation. Residents will now be able to access books from a singular book locker. The library was made possible by the Canada Healthy Communities program. Now, this micro-library is part of the $31 million initiative from Ottawa to transform public spaces during the pandemic. Robin Heffer, the CEO of Chinook Arch Regional Library Systems, says this new book locker is a vital piece of literacy for the Piikani Nation.
Basically, there are two aspects to the service. One is a holds pickup service. So once you have a card, you can go onto the Chinook Arch website. You can place a hold on any of the items in any of the participating Chinook Arch libraries, it's almost 1 million items that people would have access to. And then we have delivery vans that will deliver those materials once a week to the book locker. And then once it's been placed in the locker, you get a notification, either a text or email notification, and then just go down and collect the item from the locker. Some of the lockers have a clear front, so you can look and see which book is in there. You just put your card under the scanner and you can borrow that item. And as soon as the locker opens and you take the item, it's checked out to you automatically.
Great idea. The micro-library was installed in mid-November and is located in Brockett. A new Indian restaurant opened its doors Monday afternoon, and Lethbridge Mayor Blaine Hagan was there to cut the ribbon. He says the opening of a new business on 3rd Avenue South will help to revitalize the street. Hagan adds that it's not just the downtown that needs to be rejuvenated.
It's absolutely, our revitalization should be all over, not just in the downtown core. And council has discussed this in our strategic planning sessions that, we want to be able to open that up for promoting business all throughout our community and not just in the downtown. People need to pivot and change their ways, of course, throughout a pandemic. And now to see a restaurant opening is amazing, especially during these times. And so it's showing that we're rebounding, we're coming back, and the economy is back on track. So we're looking forward to a great future.
You know what I love about shopping downtown, supporting a lot of the mom and pop stores, the local businesses here in our community. Well, Christmas is just around the corner. Many Canadians have been busy shopping either online or in store. For our BCN poll question, we are asking, how much are you planning on spending this holiday season? Up to $100, $100 to $250, $250 to $500, or over $500. Log on to our website and vote. Visit bridgecitynews.ca. We'll tabulate the votes and have them for you on Friday's newscast. The union representing around 22,000 Alberta government workers has ratified a 4-year collective agreement. The Alberta Union of Provincial Employees says the deal will include wage increases, employment security, and the government withdrew its plan for a 4% wage rollback. Finance Minister Travis Taves says he's pleased members voted to accept the mediator's recommendation. Taves says the UCP's goal was to bring spending in line with other provinces, and this new deal with the workers accomplishes that. The former leader of the Wildrose Party in Alberta, Brian Jean, says he won the nomination to represent the UCP in an upcoming by-election in Fort McMurray-Lac La Biche. The party says the results are not official, but in a Facebook post, Jean thanked members for a very good result. A spokesperson for Jean says he beat out Joshua Gogo to secure the nomination. Jean has been quite outspoken, calling for Premier Jason Kenney to step down. There are reports the party called both candidates to offer up the results on Sunday evening, with Jean allegedly receiving 68% of the vote. Many Canadians say they're having a tough time believing their government officials, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Val Olson is a social media influencer for Medicine Hat Alberta, and she says in our province, there's a bit of a trust deficit between Albertans and their government.
How can you possibly trust people that you elected and they basically told you one thing to get your vote? Now they're in power and you're made to feel like a nobody. They do not want to hear from you. They do not even want to be around you. Remember, they are segregating people. They're not making an open space to come to the table and talk about issues.
Catch the full interview with social media influencer Val Olson and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our program. Albertans have noticed that the price of food has simply gone through the roof. Gas and rent have also gone up quite a bit these past couple of years. Political reporter Brian Lilly says when it comes to inflation, the Trudeau Liberals are blaming it on the COVID-19 pandemic. He says he doesn't necessarily buy into that.
The Liberals are trying to say part of this is the pandemic. And yeah, actually, they're trying to say almost all of it is the pandemic and supply chain issues caused by the pandemic. That's part of it. Absolutely. The pandemic is causing some of this inflation. Shortages of workers, shortages of supplies, the logistics operations around supply chains breaking down. That's all part of it, but that doesn't explain everything. That doesn't explain the rising cost of housing, which, as both the NDP and the Conservatives have pointed out, has skyrocketed since this government took office.
Mr. Lilly will have more on how inflation is hitting us pretty hard and other big stories from this past year from Parliament Hill in our year-end review. That interview is coming up after business news. Well, the feds released their fiscal update today. To discuss this in more detail is the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Franco Terrazzano, who joins us now from Ottawa. Franco, what did we learn about the new budget?
Well, we're seeing massive amount of spending, huge deficit, $144.5 billion this year. The debt is going to reach about $1.2 trillion. But even past that, there's two key takeaways for taxpayers. The first one is that Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland is somehow managing to go over budget by $7.1 billion this year. And the second key takeaway is that interest cost on the debt between now and 2027 will cost taxpayers about $200 billion.
Wow. Is there a long-term plan about trying to bring the deficit and debt under control?
This is the big issue here. We're hearing a bunch of more borrowing, but we don't see a concrete plan to start chipping away at this $1 trillion plus debt. And so many Canadians right now are concerned about the cost of living going up, while this additional spending is just going to pour more fuel on the inflation fire.
Thanks so much, Franco. That was Franco Terrazzano, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining us from Ottawa. The Saskatchewan Ministry of Agriculture says it is facing a shortage of volunteers to supply information for its weekly crop reports. The report provides data on seeding progress, insect issues, topsoil moisture conditions, and harvest progress. It has been around since the 1970s and used to have one volunteer reporter in each of the province's 296 rural municipalities, but now 46% of them are no longer covered. Officials say if anyone is interested in helping out, they can reach out to the Minister of Agriculture's Ag Knowledge Centre in Moose Jaw. Atlantic Canada was largely shut out of the last great automotive boom in North America. But with the rise of electric vehicles, parts manufacturers in Halifax, Nova Scotia are now carving out a slice of the new industry.
We're expanding our current facility. We're adding about 60,000 square feet. The purpose of that is to not only expand with some of our current business that's internal combustion based, but also electrification. We've got a couple of electric contracts that are upcoming that are quite significant, and we're working to expand our facility to keep up with that trend. Electric-wise, we're already supplying certain vehicles like the Prius, which is a Toyota electric vehicle. We've got the new Nissan Ariya, which is upcoming. That'll be launching. We have some products on that particular vehicle. The Nissan Leaf, which was a predecessor, we have products on that. The Hyundai Kona electric, we have products on that particular vehicle. Rivian's a new electric truck company. We have products that are being designed and will be manufactured for the Rivian truck company as well.
At least 88 people, including 74 in Kentucky, are now confirmed dead following tornado outbreaks that swept across various U.S. states. Kentucky's governor says search and rescue efforts continue for the missing to shelter those whose homes were destroyed.
109 Kentuckians now unaccounted for, but as I look at this broken down by county, it's way more people unaccounted for than this. 81 of these are in Hopkins County alone, 22 in Warren. It says 5 in Graves, and that can't be right. There are more people than that that we've got to identify and find, hopefully safe in Graves County. Again, because we have multiple of our towns in rubble, finding the numbers are going to move a little bit, and we're going to do the best we can to give you the most accurate information we can.
The Winnipeg Blue Bombers say they will not be hosting a parade to celebrate their Grey Cup win because of pandemic restrictions. The CFL club did say on social media, however, that it doesn't mean everyone cannot celebrate together. It says it'll be hosting a Grey Cup celebration at IG Field Wednesday at 6 p.m. A proof of immunization QR code will be required for entry into the stadium, and the event will be free. Here in southwestern Alberta, we had a lot of clouds and it was cooler today, and there's a chance of flurries arriving very soon. Complete weather details are coming up. Well, it's mainly overcast in many parts of southwestern Alberta today and colder. Jeanette Rocher is back with all of the weather details now. Jeanette, not only have the cooler temperatures arrived, but so has more of the snow?
Yeah, we saw some flurry activity earlier this afternoon in certain parts of hell, and more is on the way this week, as you can see my graph here. Expecting a possibility of flurries this evening, Thursday, and possibly next Sunday as well. Overnight lows now this is something to pay attention to. We are going into a deep freeze, -17 overnight low for tomorrow night and tonight. Into Thursday night though, look at that, -24 the overnight low. -14 in the daytime, high of -11 on Friday before we warm up a little bit on Saturday to -5, going back to -13 on the weekend. Look at that overnight low next Monday, -28. So it could be time to start plugging in our cars. These are lows that are lower than we've seen since pretty much last winter, and it's hard to believe that winter isn't even officially started yet. But average high for this time of year right now, 0. Average low, -12, so we're going to be dipping down below that this week. 16 was where we were at back in 1997. That was our warmest day on record. Coldest was -34 back in 1948. 8:21 is when the sun rose this morning. Our sun set this evening at 4:31, or I should say this afternoon, because you know, the sun goes down in the afternoon these days. Over on the west coast, expecting rains in Victoria and high winds in the Juan de Fuca Strait. 6 degrees the high for Victoria. Vancouver expecting a 60% chance of rain, 60% chance of flurries in the higher terrain. 4 degrees the high there. -19 the high in Edmonton with sunshine. Going to feel more like -30 though in the afternoon. Same thing for Calgary, looking at that -14, feeling more like -28 with the morning wind chill there. Saskatoon -15, looking at flurries activities there. Activities of flurries as well. And Regina tomorrow with a high of -10. 0 degrees in Winnipeg with increasing clouds, keeping in mind, of course, the wind chill factors, making it feel much, much colder. Toronto looking at some showers, flurries happening in Ottawa tomorrow, -1 the high, 0 the high in Montreal tomorrow, with a mix of sun and cloud. As we look to the east coast, we're seeing more precipitation there as well. Not in Fredericton though. Fredericton sunshine -2, same thing for Halifax there. Lots of sunny skies. Charlottetown, though, that's where the precipitation is happening. We're looking at flurries, -3. Also high winds, looking at 60 kilometer per hour winds. 70K winds expected in St. John's. We've been on looking at flurries as well, with a high of -4 tomorrow. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
DoorDash is expanding its restaurant food delivery business as it opens locations in Vancouver, Winnipeg, Toronto, Kitchener, and London. It is delivering goods from grocery and convenience stores with sales made solely through an app. The new locations, called Dash Mart, will be operating from 7:30 a.m. to 11 p.m. daily and carry more than 2,000 grocery and convenience store items. Rival Skip the Dishes runs a similar business model in various Canadian cities called Skip Express Lane. Canadian Pacific Railway says it has closed its $31 billion U.S. takeover of Kansas City Southern Railway. CP Rail has placed shares of KCS in a voting trust that allows shareholders to be paid while U.S. officials review the deal. The trust also ensures the U.S. Railway operates independently until the U.S. Surface Transportation Board issues its decision on the deal that will create the only single-line railroad linking Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. The Canadian Railway says it expects the review to be completed in the fourth quarter of next year. Lion Electric says it has received a conditional order for 200 all-electric school buses from a company based in southwestern Ontario. Financial terms of the deal with Lang's Bus Lines were not immediately available. The order for the buses is conditional on a grant under the federal government's Zero Emission Transit Fund. Deliveries are set to begin next year and run through the year 2026. Clothing retailer Roots beat expectations as its third quarter profit and revenue both advanced by just under 5%. Roots says it earned close to $11 million in the quarter ending October the 30th. That is up almost 5% from the same period last year. Revenue increased by 4.6% to $76.3 million. Roots says its adjusted earnings came in at 28 cents per share. That is ahead of the 21 cents analysts were expecting. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 99 points on the day to finish at 20,648. The Dow was down 106 points to 35,544. The S&P 500 was down 34 points to 4634, and the Nasdaq was down 175 points on the day to 15,237. West Texas Intermediate Oil was down 56 cents to $70.53 US per barrel. Natural gas was down 5 cents to $3.75 US. Gold was down 2 cents to $17.70.84 US an ounce, and silver was even on the day at $21.95 US an ounce. Wheat is at $12.76 per bushel, barley's at $9.69, canola's at $22.68, and corn is at $10.72 per bushel. Live cattle were down 18 cents to $136.78, feeder cattle were down 95 cents to $164.58, and lean hogs were down 10 cents to $72.18. The Canadian dollar was up slightly over the past 24 hours to 77.75 US. Recapping one of our top stories, students and staff at 2 Lethbridge high schools were evacuated and sent home earlier today due to a couple of electronic threats. Police would not reveal many details other than to say it was a precautionary measure. The schools involved were Winston Churchill and Lethbridge Collegiate Institute. The investigation is ongoing, and we'll have more information for you as it becomes available. There were a number of big headlines that came from Parliament Hill this year. Coming up, political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley has his year in review for us, discussing some of the biggest news stories from Ottawa in just a moment. This past year was very busy, and there were a number of big news stories, especially coming from Parliament Hill. Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley covered many of those stories, and he joins us now to discuss our year-end review. Now, Brian, we had a $600 million federal election, skyrocketing inflation, and the bumpy arrival of vaccines. But you say the biggest story of the year that dominated headlines was COVID-19.
Yeah, second year in a row that I'd have to say COVID-19 was the biggest story of the year because it touched on everything. It touched on the election. It touches on inflation. It's, the whole issue of vaccines and boosters is because of that. So, I wish I'd never heard of COVID-19. I wish we could stop talking about it and it would go away. I think we're all in that boat. but it remained the biggest story of 2021, dominating everything: how we lived our life, how we voted, how we spent money, how we went about shopping, how we're building back our economy after the pandemic that started 2 years ago now. So it was the dominant story in 2020. It continued to be the dominant story in 2021. Let's hope it isn't all the way through 2022.
Now let's talk about that very expensive election. We know that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau wanted to call the vote earlier, but was thwarted. In the end, you say he found a way to use the pandemic to help him win? How was that?
Absolutely. And, before he was able to call the election, there were a couple of times where he wanted to go, including the fall of 2020 and in spring and early summer of 2021. The plan had been at one point, bring in the budget, campaign on it for a couple of weeks without calling an election, and then have a vote in June. They even had dates of June 7th, June 14th picked out, but cases became too high. At that point, we didn't have vaccinations. There were still a lot of deaths in nursing homes, and he simply couldn't pull the plug and call the vote. But when he did in August, it was the start of the fourth wave. And of course, you in Alberta had a really bad spike from end of August through September, and he campaigned on that. He used the spike in Alberta to campaign in British Columbia and in Ontario to say, if you don't vote for me, if you vote for the Conservatives, you'll end up like those evil people in Alberta. You can't vote Conservative because look at what Jason Kenney did. That's how he won in the end, because he squeaked out seats that a lot of people had not been expecting. He moved, certain key demographics, in particular women, just by a couple of points that allowed him to win government with the smallest, percentage support of the popular vote in Canadian history. And he was able to do that by campaigning in BC and Ontario. He picked up more seats in BC than anyone expected, gave him enough seats to hold on to power. It was all about COVID, all about the pandemic, and campaigning against Alberta, where, strangely enough, his party won 2 seats.
Now, inflation is a word that's been on everyone's lips. We've seen the price of gas go through the roof, groceries, rent. We saw inflation hover around 4.4% for a lot of 2021. Brian, Ottawa claims that COVID was the main reason for inflation, but do you buy that?
No, not really. And, it's bizarre that inflation has become such a big word. I remember when I was a kid, my mother going shopping and all the posters of inflation fighters. And, that was the big push at the grocery store. We've got the lower prices. We'll help you fight inflation. And it hasn't been a huge issue in decades. It's popped up now and again, but not the way it was in the early 80s, not the way that we're headed now. So this is quite something to see. There are people who have never dealt with inflation like this in their lifetimes. The Liberals are trying to say part of this is the pandemic. And yeah, actually, they're trying to say almost all of it is the pandemic and supply chain issues caused by the pandemic. That's part of it. Absolutely. The pandemic is causing some of this inflation, shortages of workers, shortages of supplies, the logistics operations around supply chains breaking down. That's all part of it. But that doesn't explain everything. That doesn't explain the rising cost of housing, which, as both the NDP and the Conservatives have pointed out, has skyrocketed since this government took office. The average home price going from about $450,000 across the country to over $720,000. Last time you and I talked about that, you said you'd like to see it without Toronto and Vancouver included. Well, absolutely, but the prices have still gone up. This has gone from becoming what used to be a Toronto and a Vancouver problem to being a national problem, where all over the place people are saying, well, wait a minute, I used to be able to get a house for X, now it's Y, and it doesn't make sense. So you can't just put all of this off on the pandemic. They're trying. Other parts of it are driven by the monetary policy of the Bank of Canada, the spending of this government, which has been higher than many of our comparable countries in the OECD. So there are a lot of reasons for this. You can't just say COVID, shake your hands or wash your hands of it and hope things get better. They've got to act. They've got to do something.
It's interesting. I have friends that live in Phoenix, Arizona. They say to me, we watch a lot of those home reno shows that you produce in Canada there. Some of the houses listed in Vancouver and Toronto, 1.5, 1.8 million, 700-foot bungalow built in the 1950s. It's falling apart. They say, you know what you can buy here in Phoenix for 1.5 million with swimming pools? My whole block. I'm like, or just outside of Phoenix. I'm like, wow. So it really puts things into perspective. Brian, we first learned of the virus 2 years ago. We've had vaccines for about a year. Do you think that this story will be with us through 2023?
It could be in some ways. I'm hoping that it lessens, but we're going to have to wait and see. We've got this Omicron variant that has arrived on our shores, and it spreads fast. I can tell you that just last Friday, they were saying, well, 10% of cases in Ontario now are the Omicron variant. Now it's over 30%. In the next couple of days, it will be more than half of the cases. But is it more severe? Some early data out of South Africa and the European Union says, no, it's much milder, especially if you're vaccinated. But the simple truth of the matter is we don't have enough data to know for sure, which is why people are on edge. So, one scenario that I've spoken to experts about is that if this is milder, especially for people who've had, one shot or a previous infection, then, what we could see is that if it's a mild infection and it goes through a large part of the population, well, then herd immunity starts to build up. We start to get to the point where it's not really something that's going to dominate and fill our hospitals. And that's what everyone's always worried about. Not the case numbers anymore, it's the hospitalization. So that's the number to track for the next little while. If this is mild, then perhaps everything peters out in 2022, and by the summer, we are back to normal. I mean, I hate to think of what will happen if that's not the case.
Brian, the first vaccine doses arrived in our country about a year ago and were rolled out into nursing homes. Now we're on to our third doses. Now, you've been chatting with some doctors. Is there any end in sight to vaccinations for COVID-19? Are we going to get our 6th, 7th, 8th booster shots here?
What the doctors that I've been speaking with are saying is that this will eventually become like the flu shot, something that we get on an annual basis. That this is very much like, some people still freak if you compare this to the flu. But look, the Spanish flu was the last huge pandemic that went through like this. And we still get flu shots. Spanish flu never went away, one doctor said to me last week. We just are used to it. It's not as virulent. But for people who are immune compromised, especially the elderly or people with certain medical conditions, you get the flu shot. I'm pretty healthy, but depending on the year and if I'm near my doctor or at the pharmacy at the right time, I've gotten a flu shot as well. Helps give you some protection. And if you do get infected, you're not as sick. That's what they're saying is going to be the case with COVID-19. And hopefully, as the years go on, fewer and fewer of us need it, much like the flu shot. The uptake on the annual flu shot is not even 50% in a normal year. And let's hope that we get that way eventually with COVID-19. But yes, for the foreseeable future, it's going to be an annual shot. And that's not because the vaccines don't work. It's because of the type of illness that it is. It's a respiratory illness, much like the flu. And it works differently. And vaccines work differently than, say, chickenpox or shingles or mumps. It's a very different disease, very different way the vaccine works.
Brian, with the swearing in of U.S. President Joe Biden, Canada-U.S. relations were supposed to improve. Now, you say in some ways it has, but in many other ways, including on the jobs front and trades front, it simply is not.
Yeah, look, with Donald Trump, you always got the feeling that you weren't sure if he liked Canada. His attention was definitely elsewhere. And at times he seemed to want to pick fights. His first fight with the supply management for dairy apparently happened because he found out it existed. And the fact that it existed enraged him. And that started some of the tariffs that we saw. But at other times, Trump simply used tariffs as a negotiating tool to try and get a better trade deal. And we saw that during the NAFTA renegotiations. With Joe Biden, it's different. Joe Biden isn't using tariffs and different protectionist measures to get a better trade deal. He's using them because he believes in them. And he believes in a very protectionist view of America's economy. That's bad news for Canada, given how integrated we are. Whether we're talking about softwood lumber, we're talking about oil, we're talking about autos or potatoes and PEI, or yes, even the dairy industry under threat again. All of these things are in Joe Biden's sights, and we're not having a lot of luck. There has been talk on the auto front that maybe we have a comparable tax incentive to what the Americans have proposed, and it becomes North American wide. Well, if that's a solution, so be it. It beats losing 400,000 jobs. But we've got all these other trade irritants that we have to figure out. And figuring them out may require not talking to the White House like we have in the past, but talking more to Congress, talking to people in the House of Representatives and the Senate to get them to push back against their own president, and even have Democrats say, you know what, you're hurting us as much as you're hurting the Canadians with what you're doing. We haven't had luck with that so far. I hope we have better luck under the Trudeau government on this file in 2023.
Now, there's no doubt that 2021 was a pretty tough year for the Canadian military. It began with allegations against a former chief of defense staff and continued throughout the year, culminating with an apology. Brian, how do things stand right now with our Canadian Armed Forces?
Still in a bit of a shambles. I mean, can you believe how, as we were preparing for this, I looked back and I said, a year ago now, Jonathan Vance had not retired. We did not have any allegations of sexual impropriety or misconduct against him. And how many chiefs of defense staff and temporary chiefs of defense staff or senior military leaders have we gone through since then? People who have lost their jobs over recent and or historical claims of sexual misconduct in the military. We just had the recent apology. Notably, it did not come from the Prime Minister. It came from the Defense Minister. As many pundits have pointed out, this is a Prime Minister who apologizes for anything and everything, but he would not do the apology himself for members of the Canadian Armed Forces and the failures of this and previous governments to make sure that they have a safe and productive work environment. So we're at the point where the apologies happened. They're talking about doing more, but we keep hearing about more allegations coming forward as well. There are too many claims of the old boys club. That people in the past have raised concerns. The military has investigated itself and found no problems. It's like the cops investigating themselves. We don't allow that to happen. We can't allow it to happen in the military. We've got to get this cleaned up because there are other big issues that the military needs to deal with that they're not able to deal with right now because this is seizing most of it. We haven't picked a fighter jet to replace the CF-18s that are damaged, that could be falling out of the sky at any point. We've got helicopters with cracks in them. The people that continue to serve are being asked to serve with unsafe equipment. All eyes and all efforts is on dealing with this issue that should have been dealt with 6 years ago when they had the report, the Deschamps report, detailing what was wrong. They didn't fix it for 6 years. They tried to sweep it under the rug, and the rug just got bumpier to the point where you couldn't ignore it anymore.
Brian, banned words and phrases became a big thing this year. And I mean, CBC declared the word spooky was racist. Ontario Civil Service declared the term low-hanging fruit problematic. And colleges and universities around the country updated speech codes. Brian, have we become a little soft, maybe overly sensitive as a society, or do you think this is justified?
I think we've become a little too sensitive as a society. I mean, the CBC story that came out first saying spooky is a racist word. Their whole reasoning for that is that spooky comes from spook, which is a Dutch-German word origin meaning ghost. And at some point from the 1940s on, some people use that as a derogatory term for Black men. Well, that's not how most people use the word spook or spooky. And so how do you take a word that everybody uses at Halloween and say, well, you can't say spooky because it's racist? Nobody's used it like that. I mean, unless you're hanging out with 90-year-old Klansmen, that's not a thing. And then the Ontario Civil Service, when they put out their list and said we have to get rid of phrases, the low-hanging fruit example, they said right in the document detailing why you need to get rid of this, that, well, there's no actual connection to racism, but some people who have seen lynchings might be bothered by the term low-hanging fruit. I'm sorry, how they're not related at all. You're going to worry about somebody being triggered over something that's not related. Low-hanging fruit is what you let the kids pick when you go apple picking. You know, it's easy to pick fruit. It has nothing to do with hanging people. So yeah, I think we've got too many civil servants. We've got too many people with not enough time on their hands. You know, while many of us were struggling during the pandemic, a lot of businesses trying to hang on. This is what an awful lot of bureaucrats were spending their time doing. Now, let's invent reasons why words and phrases are racist so that we can ban them. Makes zero sense.
Brian, we only have about a moment left here, but I wanted to ask you about the Conservatives blasting the Liberals on Bill C-10, which they say would limit our freedom of speech and allow the government too much control of the internet. Now, the bill is being brought back. Where does it stand now? Where are we at?
Well, we're at the point where the Liberals say that they're determined to bring it back. Will they bring it back in a different form? I'm hoping so. I hope they take some time to realize that what they put forward last time was not what was there. Unfortunately, as several Conservatives told me, they expected that they might pick up some votes off of this issue. They didn't think they did. I also think they didn't campaign very hard on it. It was a very popular issue in the lead up to the election. It didn't get a lot of play during the election. Maybe if they'd leaned on it more, some younger voters who are worried about their social media feeds being censored by the government might have stepped up and said, you know what, I'm not voting Liberal this time. But hopefully there was a lot of backlash from the left and the right. Hopefully this time they learn their lesson and bring back a changed bill, because they say they're determined to do something.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks for doing a great job for us this year.
Thank you, Hal.
Well, as we come to the close of 2021, the Alberta government is looking forward to a growing economy in 2022. However, many Albertans are seeking an increase to the trust deficit. Some feel that their trust of the UCP MLAs and Jason Kenney have been damaged. Today's guest is no stranger to politics or to the tasks of being a mom and creating online content. Home media mom Val Olson is from Medicine Hat. She joins us via Zoom to talk about the impact of 2021 on Alberta families and a path forward for Albertans and the provincial government. Val, so great to have you back on today.
Thanks so much for having me today.
Absolutely. So Val, we're going to get into the issue of Alberta's lack of trust in the provincial government. But first, let's talk about the impact government decisions have had on Alberta families. So just like businesses need certainty, right? So do families need certainty and consistency from their government? And you're a mom, of course, right, Val? So you know all about this, but what have you been hearing from other parents? What were some of the unintended consequences from government policy and mandates this past year?
Well, what's really backfired, I would say, on the government is parents are starting to see what's actually going on inside of classrooms. So that's a big thing. Parents are taking hold of their children's education. And what's coming out of the classroom is surprising parents, because many children were taking their classes online, many over Zoom. And so parents were like, wow, is that actually what is being called education today? So that backfired on the government, and parents are on the ball and they are involved and they want to see changes for the better for their kids. Also, mental health. I mean, it is so sad. And when you stop and you think about it, most homes have both parents working. That is what's common. And so depression, job loss, just uncertainty, heightened anxiety, all those things are having consequences on Albertans, and the government is the source of that. So, we need to have more talking at the table for sure. People are also cutting ties and taking their faith back. And I think that is a good thing. There's not this worshiping almighty government for the source and provider of everything. People are looking in themselves and they're starting to come back to their morals and values and saying, look, we want to recover. We have hope, a renewed hope, and that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned the education system. So you're a parent who homeschools, but what have other mothers been telling you about the impacts of COVID on Alberta's education system?
Well, I want to, come back to when parents had their children going to school some days and then not the next day. There was no consistency. And so it forced parents to really take a hands-on approach to their children's education. So, they were starting to pay attention to the content that was called education for their kids, coming in oftentimes through, Zoom meetings. And what was exposed was an anti-family agenda under the guise of education. So, that was a huge thing. And when that's exposed, Mama Bear is on the ball. And so expect changes there. Also, socializing for children. What were they supposed to do when extracurricular activities were cut? the government crushed these children's dreams and hijacked all of the good things in life. I mean, they took holidays, they canceled this and canceled Christmas. They canceled all kinds of the best memories that children need. It's a core part of their lives that shape and impact them for the rest of their lives. So all the damage that the government has caused, the full amount of it is yet to be fully determined.
A good point there. Now, businesses, of course, also took a hit this past year, and it was really dire for many of them. What about the flip-flop of the Alberta government on the open, not open, now we're open, now we're not open for business? Same thing with the kids, as you were mentioning. They were going to school, then they weren't. I mean, it's hard on people.
It's so sad. Small businesses were literally hung. They were targeted. And the approach that was taken was truly to kill off small business. And the government has been successful at this. And so now the few small businesses that are just left hanging, it's so crucial that we support them and we come back to that sense of community and we support small businesses.
Absolutely. So important, especially right now during the holidays, doing our Christmas shopping and stuff. It's a very good, important reminder to keep in mind there. So based on what you've heard from families or business owners, do you think that there's a workable solution and better approach going forward?
Well, I think we need to address the fact that we've had too much government interference. And I cannot imagine one government employee or politician that wouldn't say, yeah, we really have had a lot of interference in people's regular lives and, hijacking their choice, because they've really taken choice away from people. And instead they've come down with this, approach, this top-down approach. And so if we're going to work together, it's important to address, how we treat each other, how we speak to each other, and we establish accountability. So that's very, very important. There's been a lot of mistakes. I mean, I could take vaccine passports and, the security end of that just blew up in government faces. That was just very, very sad and alarming to have all of your personal data compromised. My goodness, terrible. And also the vaccine passports ushered in segregation. And for the government to be behind segregating policies, that is a fail grade, in my opinion. And many, many parents, I'm just the echo here. I'm talking the majority of people don't like the feeling of segregation in their communities.
Yeah, exactly. Now, RBC economists seem to be quite bullish on the Alberta economy for 2022. Many say that Alberta had a large hole to work its way out of. So as oil prices are strong right now, what do you think families can expect for their finances for this upcoming year?
Well, it's less spending money. I mean, how are you even going to drive your cars? And honestly, what it comes down to is food at the table. We're talking about the ability to feed your children delicious Alberta beef, which is healthy and wholesome, or are you going to put a wiener on their plate? And in some cases, that's if you're lucky. Many are forced, if they don't qualify for regulated, food programs put on behalf of the government, they find themselves at the dollar store buying made in China food. So, quality of food is a huge thing and what families are actually able to put on the table. It's scary.
Yeah, they're saying that prices are going to just skyrocket through the roof too this upcoming year. So yeah, it is a little bit scary. So let's talk about the relationship between Albertans and their government. There seems to be a real trust deficit as the result of recent policy.
There is a trust deficit. I mean, where I sit, how can you possibly trust people that you elected and they basically told you one thing to get your vote? Now they're in power and you're made to feel like a nobody. They do not want to hear from you. They do not even want to be around you. Remember, they are segregating people. They're not making an open space to come to the table and talk about issues. And so everything should be looked at when it comes to healing, that healing and holistic approach. It starts around the table with discussions. And in order to clean up this mess, we're going to have to sit down with our leaders and talk to them about the solutions moving forward.
Is that kind of what you're hearing from other parents about how the government can maybe rebuild that trust with them?
What I'm hearing from parents is that they want to talk to their officials, but they have no way of doing it. Over the phone is not working for them. A lot of them are comparing letters that they're receiving. They're receiving those, those impersonal blanket letters that are just written in the back room by a bureaucrat, and they're putting those letters, they're showing them to each other and saying, "Look at mine." And then someone else shows it and says, "Look at mine." And before you know it, you see, wow, there's no personal connection with these people. So that's really, really sad that we've lost that sense of being able to go to the people we've elected and talk through a problem. There's just no trust there.
Yeah, that's interesting. So talking about trusting government, let's have a look over to the national level. So we've seen what some conservatives are calling a heavy-handed control of the conservative MPs. So when we take a look at what happened with Derek Sloan and Senator Denise Batters, what's your opinion of how or what Erin O'Toole is doing?
Well, what comes to mind, and what and I'm just an echo here because I've heard this a lot from Albertans in terms of Erin O'Toole's conduct. Who does that? What kind of man actually voice messages, like leaves a message on somebody's cell phone to fire them? How weak is that? On a national level, that's just a national embarrassment. This man is leading a party and he doesn't have the confidence or ability to sit down at a table and address with Denise what his concerns are, just leaves a voice message. That is not conduct of a leader. And if that's the best that the Conservative Party can muster, is that serious trouble.
Okay, Val, so you've said before that politics starts at the Alberta dinner table, which is actually a paraphrase quote from Ronald Reagan. So what should be driving political policy?
Everything good, I believe, starts and happens at the dinner table. That's where problems are solved. And it's because the people around the table you genuinely care about. And that's not the attitude that we have in politics right now. But I think if we take that approach and people come to the table and sit down and listen to each other and ultimately strategize together with shared values and morals. And so we're all heading the same direction, good things will come.
Okay, so Val, since you're talking about the dinner table and people that you care about, obviously that includes our children. So what about conversations with kids? There are so many influential factors on our young ones, right? So what have you found as a way to share issues and ideas with your kids?
Well, homeschooling is a great way to do that. But if you're not homeschooling your kids, that's fine too. Sit down with them and bring them into the conversation. I know it's kind of old fashioned, but I'm telling you that it's tried, tested, and true to make time around the dinner table. Start there and turn off the TV, or at least hit it on mute, and start having conversations with your kids about what they think. I involve mine, and they range in age from 4 up to 16, and the perspective is always different. And they feel a part of the process. And I recognize at the same time, I'm helping shape their morals as they go by including them in these conversations. And you will be shocked at some of the answers you get from your kids.
Yeah, that's interesting. And with that said, how can parents advocate for the preservation of their morals and values in our society and in government? How can you kind of keep that going?
Don't be afraid. Don't be intimidated. That is my best advice. Have courage and bring to the table what you have. We all have these skills and dreams. Dream big. Don't forget about what you wanted in life when you were little, even when you're an adult. So many adults forget to dream big. And I know that for me, myself, my dreams are that we have peace and we have community and we have all these good things. And so you have to go after those things. And you have to have sometimes hard conversations, but that's okay. Don't be afraid of having a hard conversation. That's where healing truly does begin.
Home media mom Val Olson, thanks so much for joining me today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.